In the cabin, washed in golden firelight, Clara, a black widow who had lived 3 years in solitude, trembled as the calloused hand of Elias Boone, the white man who had lost his ranch, drew tight around her waist. He bent low, his breath warm against her skin, pulling her back into the rush of 25, when a single glance was enough to set a heart racing. The bedsheets lay rumpled, wind whispered against the porch boards, all of it weaving into the backdrop as two worn bodies reached for one another after so much loss. Yet even in the shelter of his arms, a question lingered like an echo in the firelight. Was this love, true and steady, or only the late hunger of two souls starved too long? The desert wind cut through the cactus stands, carrying dust and the sense that death itself was hiding somewhere in the night. Clara Johnson stood alone on the porch, her shoulders wrapped in a cloak that smelled of smoke. At 56, her dark skin bore the trace of years, but her black eyes still held the fire of someone who had survived loss and refused to break. 3 years earlier, she had buried her husband beneath the hill behind the house. Since then, the Double J Ranch echoed only with her footsteps and the thin cries of worn-out cattle. At her hip, the Colt rested under the cloak. Clara had learned one rule: men who arrived after midnight rarely carried good intentions. The wind swept harder, pushing up white columns of dust under the moon. Then, through the howl, another sound broke. Hoofbeats, urgent, heavy, like a warning racing toward her ranch. Clara straightened, her hand brushing the cold grip of the gun. A dark figure pushed out of the night. The horse staggered, its mane wet with sweat, foam breaking at its mouth. The rider slumped low, broad shoulders casting long shadows. His hat pulled low, hiding his face. When the horse lurched to a stop before the porch, Clara saw blood soaking the left sleeve. The stranger raised his head. Beneath the brim, his eyes caught the moonlight, cold, but not lifeless. The eyes of a man who had faced death more than once, and still clung hard to living. "Ma'am," his voice rasped, rough as sandpaper on skin. "Name's Elias Boone. My horse is done, and I'm not far behind." Clara tightened her grip on the gun. She was used to solitude, to trusting only herself. Yet those eyes, bright as forged steel, held her long enough to stir something she thought buried. The heart she believed had frozen with her husband's death gave a faint, forgotten tremor. Elias slid from the saddle. His tall frame tilted, bracing on the porch rail to steady himself. In the pale light, she saw scars across his weathered face, and fresh blood dripping from his arm. "I ask nothing more than a place to lie out the night. I'll pay, or work come morning. All I need is a roof and a little water." Clara stood still. Since her husband's death, no man had crossed this threshold. Love and desire had been buried deep with the body under the red soil. At 56, she believed yearning was a thing for the young. But this stranger, dangerous, worn, mysterious, pulled at her in a way she could not turn aside. Their eyes locked. It lasted a breath, yet felt like a storm. Distrust, fear, and something nameless ran between them. Clara sensed the edge before her. Close the door and remain untouched, or open it and step into a path she could not predict. The desert wind struck her face, sharp and dry. She drew a deep breath before speaking. "You're bleeding." A thin smile tugged at his mouth. Half thanks, half defiance. "Just a scrape. Worst is behind me. A little water and I'll be fine." Clara gave no answer. Her hand stayed near the gun, yet her eyes did not leave him. Something unspoken had already taken root, touching the part of her she had thought turned to stone. Outside, his horse whinnied and dropped its head, spent as its rider. The sound hung over the yard, stirring pity as much as caution. Clara felt her breath catch, not from fear, but from the raw presence of life standing before her, battered yet unbroken. Slowly, she let her hand fall from the gun. Not trust, not yet, but not the hardness to send him away either. In her eyes flickered the same thing Elias sought, a chance to keep going. She stepped aside, pushing open the worn wooden door of the Double J. "Come in," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "One night only." Elias dipped his head like a pilgrim finding shelter. His shadow stretched across the porch floor as he crossed the threshold. One Clara knew, from this moment on, would never be the same. Outside, the desert wind howled on. But inside that small house, another story had begun. The old hinges gave a long groan as Clara pushed the door wide. Outside, the desert wind tore through the yucca stalks, as if it meant to pull the stranger back into the night. Inside, the cabin glowed faintly with the oil lamp hanging on the wall, its trembling light painting shadows across the faded boards. Elias Boone stepped in, his heavy boots striking the dusty floor. He was so tall the low rafters seemed to press down. His shadow filled the narrow kitchen, carrying with it the smell of leather, gunpowder, and the iron tang of blood. Clara stood still, the door half closed behind her, feeling the space draw tight until it held only the two of them. "Thank you, ma'am," Elias said, his voice hoarse, each word rough as gravel. He moved forward but faltered, bracing on the table. Blood seeped through the torn sleeve of his gray shirt, dark drops falling to stain the wood beneath. The practical part of Clara woke. 3 years alone had taught her to mend everything herself, from broken corral boards to knife cuts across her own palms. She set the Colt on the counter and walked to the wash basin. "Sit down," she said, steady and firm. Elias lifted his gaze. In the dim light his eyes caught, weary yet unbent. He said nothing, only pulled out a chair. The wood groaned beneath his weight. Clara poured water into a basin, drew out a clean cloth. Her heartbeat thudded too loud in her chest. She told herself this was nothing more than tending a wound, no different than binding the leg of a lame horse. But when she turned and found him half out of his shirt, broad shoulders and corded muscles stark against his sun-darkened skin, her hands betrayed a tremor. She pulled the torn sleeve aside. The wound was not mortal, but blood still slicked his arm. Clara dipped the cloth, wrung it out, pressed it firm against the gash. He drew a sharp breath, a ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Just stings a little. You'd best keep quiet and let me work," Clara answered, her voice sharper than she meant, as if severity could mask the stir inside her. Her fingers brushed bare skin as she cleaned away the blood. The touch was slight, yet Elias's brow lifted, his eyes leaving the wound to rest on her face. They were dark as the desert night, but held something that pressed the air out of her lungs. Clara dropped her gaze, kept her hands moving, though the cloth shook faintly between her fingers. Elias noticed, his voice lowered, sand sliding through the wind. "Been a long time since anyone tended to me like this." Clara gave no reply. She wound the bandage tight, her world filled with the scent of leather, sweat, and smoke. When she tied the knot, her knuckles grazed his skin again. And this time Elias did not look away. His eyes lingered on her face, the sun-worn lines, the history etched there. She felt as if he saw through every wall she had built in 3 years of silence. "It's done," Clara said quickly, drawing her hands back. Elias rolled his shoulder, testing the arm. "You're skilled. Learned medicine?" "Only learned to fend for myself." Clara rose, carried the basin of bloody water out to the porch. When she returned, Elias had pulled his shirt on, though he left it open, the pale scar across his chest catching the lamp glow. He glanced around the kitchen, the table, the 2 chairs, the cold hearth. His eyes paused on the faded picture hanging on the wall. Clara's husband, standing proud beside a bay horse. Elias asked nothing. He only nodded once, as if the silence told him all he needed. Clara trimmed the lamp's flame. Its gold light softened her face. "You can take the spare room out back, but remember, only one night." Elias pushed himself upright, slow and deliberate. As he passed, the space between them narrowed to the breath of a heartbeat. Clara caught the scent of horsehide, powder, and something purely male, something that made her pulse skip. He paused, as though on the edge of saying more, but settled only for a small nod. Thank you, I won't forget this. Clara swallowed hard, stepped back. She watched his shadow fade through the doorway to the spare room. Her hands were still trembling. The kitchen settled into stillness, broken only by the tick of the wall clock. Clara lowered herself into the chair, her eyes drawn to the blood-stained cloth left on the table. She asked herself why she had opened the door. Pity? Or something deeper? Something she dared not yet name. Outside, the desert wind still howled. But inside, a different quiet had fallen taut, waiting, like a pool before the stone is cast. Clara pressed her palm to her chest, where her heart beat too fast, and closed her eyes. Tonight, she knew, sleep would not come easy. Dawn on the desert came quiet, without the clamor found in other lands. Light bled slowly across the rim of the earth, tinting distant ridges with rose and violet, before spilling down onto the dry plain still damp with night's breath. A few meadowlarks called, the wind carrying the last chill of darkness before the sun laid its fire down. Clara Johnson opened her eyes after a night of tossing. Sleep never held her long, not with a stranger lying in the room that had stood empty for 3 years. Yet what stirred inside her was not unease alone. It was something else strange, hard to name. She rose, wrapped the wool shawl over her shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. There, she stopped cold. Elias Boone stood in the yard, his frame cut against the pale sky of morning. Bare to the waist, only worn jeans and boots on him, he swung an axe through the heart of dry logs. Each stroke was sure, the blade driving deep, sending splinters flashing in the newborn light. Sweat shone on his shoulders and chest like dew. Clara clutched the doorframe. How long had it been since a man's shadow filled this yard? Since Tom, her husband, was lowered beneath the hill, every heavy task had fallen to her hands. But now, watching Elias bend, lift, and strike until the wood split clean, she felt a peace she had not known in years, though it came laced with strangeness. He glanced up, caught her watching. For a breath he paused, then gave a worn, honest smile. Figured I ought to earn my keep, he said, voice rough in the cool air. Heat rose to Clara's cheeks, quick and unexplained. She turned away into the kitchen, set coffee to brew. When she returned, Elias had stacked the wood neat beside the porch. He took the tin cup from her hand, his calloused fingers brushing hers. The touch was fleeting, yet a spark shot through her arm. Clara drew back faster than she meant, sloshing coffee over the rim. Sorry, Elias murmured, eyes steady on her. It's nothing, Clara said, though her voice rasped more than usual. She set the pot down on the table outside, keeping her gaze elsewhere. They sat across from one another, drinking in silence. The morning wind stirred, carrying the scent of damp earth. Clara studied him over the rim of her cup. He sipped, slow, dark eyes shaded beneath the brim of a straw hat he'd found. His face was seared by sun, jaw marked by an old scar. Every line spoke of storms endured. You didn't have to do that, Clara said, her fingers tightening on the handle. I never asked you to split wood. Elias set his cup down, drummed the table once. I don't like debts, least of all to the one who pulled me through the night. And work with my hands reminds me I'm still worth something. His gaze held hers, and Clara's chest drew tight. She turned aside, though the color in her cheeks gave her away. After a plain breakfast of cornbread and smoked meat, Elias walked with her to the corral. One mare still shook from the storm the week before, jerking the reins when Clara reached for her. Elias stepped close, laid a hand to the mane, speaking low as though to an old companion. In minutes the animal stilled, eyes half closed, breathing calm. Clara watched, surprised. You've a way with horses. He shrugged, palm resting gentle. I grew up with them. When I lost family, horses were what I had left. Maybe they know more about hurt than most folks reckon. Clara looked longer than she meant. His words pressed a place in her that still remembered Tom's laughter, the warmth on the porch now gone to memory. Later, while they fixed the broken stall door, her hand brushed his. Elias turned his palm, letting their fingers touch a beat longer. No words passed, only a quiet held gaze, long enough for heat to swell in her chest. By noon, the sun bore down. They came back to the porch, and Clara poured him a cup of water. This time his fingers lingered deliberate on hers. His eyes held steady, and for a breath, the world froze. Clara drew in sharp, turned away on the pretense of setting the jug down. But the rest of the day, her mind circled that small touch, so slight, yet it made her feel younger than she had in years. That night, as she sat under the oil lamp, stitching an old shirt, she heard the steady rhythm of the axe outside. Each strike fell true, wood cracking clean. The sound carried through the walls, as sure as a heartbeat, steady, dependable, reminding her that trust, long buried, was being built again, stroke by stroke, glance by glance, touch by touch. That evening, the desert sun sank behind the distant ridges, leaving the sky burning with the colors of hot coals. Clara sat on the porch steps, a wooden cup of warm coffee in her hands. Smoke from the stove drifted faint, mingling with the dry scent of hay and the calls of cattle from the far pens. Elias Boone came back from checking the north fence. His stride was steady but heavy, as if he carried a lifetime's weariness. Clara noticed the dust across his shoulders, and the shadow that lived behind his eyes, a darkness no daylight could drive out. He lowered himself into the wooden chair beside her, exhaled slow. "Fence'll hold another season, but I reckon you've patched it more than once yourself." Clara nodded. 3 years now. I've done it all. Not with a man's strength, but enough to get by. She paused, watching the last light fade. Back then, I never thought I'd live through it alone. Elias turned the cup in his hand, silent. Clara didn't know what made her keep speaking. My husband, Tom, cancer took him. It gnawed at him a whole year. I watched him fade day by day, wishing fate would spare him the pain, even if it meant taking him sooner. But fate's never kind. Her voice frayed, like wind squeezing through a cracked door. The funeral was small. Since then, this house has known only my footsteps and the sound of the wind. Elias lifted his eyes, dark and steady, carrying a warmth without words. He offered no hollow comfort, only the silence of someone who could bear the weight with her. Clara drew a long breath, forced a thin smile. "Forgive me. I don't talk much. Maybe because you're sitting here," I remembered. Elias set his cup down, fingers locking together, veins raised. His voice came low, roughened by sand. "I lost everything too. Not to sickness, but to the land. 5 years back, drought burned the fields clean. Cattle dropped one by one. Then the bank came, took the last of my father's ground. I stood there with nothing but a saddle and a gun." He let out a hollow laugh, without mirth. "Since then I've drifted, hired out wherever I could. Nobody stays close to a man with nothing left to lose." Clara studied him. The lines pressed deep on his brow, the tightness in his jaw as he spoke of the past. His wounds ran deeper than flesh. "Still, you stood up and kept on," she said softly. Elias looked out toward the wide land. "A man lives not always because he wants to, but because he's given no choice. But there are mornings I wake and ask myself what for. Maybe not till I stepped onto this porch did I feel I might find reason again." Clara's breath caught. The evening wind lifted the silver strands at her temple. For a moment, their eyes held, and no words were needed. He slid his chair nearer. The last light caught the scar that ran from collarbone to chest, half hidden beneath his open shirt. Clara reached out, meaning only to pull the fabric closed, but her fingers rested on the scar instead. His skin burned under her touch, solid and warm. The scar's rough ridge spoke of a story untold, She waited for him to flinch, to push her hand away. He did not. He met her eyes, calm, steady. "Bullet did that," he said, voice low, echoing like out of a cave. "That day I thought I'd die. Guess fate wasn't through with me yet." Clara pulled her hand back, though her heart thundered. Something unseen had been set between them, not in promises spoken, but in silence, in a touch. Night settled, stars pricking one by one. Clara rose to stir the fire inside. Elias followed, helping her set supper. He cut bread, while she stirred the pot of soup. They moved side by side, hands brushing at times. Each small touch sent a ripple through her, while his eyes stayed steady, deep, as though each touch carried weight. When the meal was laid, they ate quiet, the kind of quiet that held ease. His presence alone lightened the emptiness that had lived in the house for 3 years. Afterward, Elias drew a battered harmonica from his saddlebag. He played a tune soft and mournful, notes drifting into the night. Clara sat on the porch, eyes closed, letting the sound carry her back to youth, when music and love seemed certain. Later, when Elias bid her good night and walked to the spare room, Clara remained on the porch. She touched her chest, where her heart still beat hard. For the first time in years, she felt alive, truly alive, not just enduring, and she knew 2 souls, each carrying their own losses, had found in each other a reflection. What was gone did not make them weaker. It became the ground where something new might take root. That afternoon the sky shifted fast. Arizona plains, usually scorched and brittle, darkened under a sweep of storm clouds rolling in from the horizon. Strange winds carried the scent of water, bending the dry grass flat and rattling the shutters. Clara was stacking seed sacks in the shed when thunder boomed distant and low, like a war drum. She stepped onto the porch. The air held its breath. The sky hung heavy, the color of lead, and the wind brought with it the taste of earth ready to drink. Clara pulled her shawl tight across her shoulders. From the corral came Elias, hair tousled by the gusts, his shirt streaked with red dust. He glanced up at the clouds, brow furrowed, and strode toward the porch. "Storm's comin' hard," he said, voice certain, the sound of a man who had known desert tempests before. Clara gripped the post, hands clutching the edge of her shawl. She was not afraid of rain, but the nearness of Elias set her pulse off beat. Together they watched the lightning tear across the gray sky, a flare that lit the land white. Then the rain fell. The first drops were wide as coins, striking roof and cracked soil with force. In a breath, the whole prairie was drowned in water. The roar of it swallowed every sound. On the porch, the 2 of them stood side by side, their breath mingling in the damp air. Elias pulled the leather coat from his shoulders and held it toward her. "Take it. Night's gonna turn cold." Clara shook her head, but his hand stayed steady, patient. At last she took it. Their fingers brushed calloused skin against her own. The touch was brief, yet it struck like a match to kindling that had lain buried too long. She drew the coat close, the scent of leather and powder clinging, the scent of Elias himself. She breathed deep, trying to still the tremor inside. Another flash lit his face. Rain sprayed onto the porch, beading on his hair and shoulders, shining under the storm's light. He turned toward her, eyes burning dark, fierce and held in check. Clara broke away, fixing her gaze on the white curtain of rain. But her heart would not obey. It hammered fast, reckless. She reminded herself. He was a stranger, a wanderer, a man with shadows for a past. Still, her hand ached to reach for him. Elias stood close enough for her to smell his skin, feel his warmth even as the wind cut cold. At last he spoke, voice low. "Been years since I saw rain here. It's wild, but it's beautiful." Clara nodded faintly. "Like something you thought was gone, then found again." The words slipped out, and heat rose in her cheeks. Elias turned to her, as if to press for more, but said nothing. The storm wrapped them in its cover, all that went unspoken, hidden by the downpour. A gust hurled rain across the porch, stinging her cheek. Clara flinched, stumbling back. Elias caught her elbow, his hand firm, steadying her upright. She looked up, met his eyes. The wind tangled her silver hair, but his grip did not loosen. His gaze held hers, as if to say this moment meant more than words could. Her heart thundered. She pulled free, quick, though the heat of his hand lingered on her skin. "Thank you," she murmured, voice nearly lost to the rain. Elias gave a short nod, a faint smile ghosting his mouth. He turned back to the storm, though the whitened knuckles on the rail betrayed the battle inside him. They stood like that, two figures against the storm. The air thickened, heavy with what neither dared name. Clara felt herself both fragile and strong. Fragile before the hunger stirring, strong for knowing she still could feel it. The storm raged through the afternoon, easing only as night came on. When the last drops fell from the eaves, Clara noticed her hand still rested against the coat he had given her, clinging to its warmth. She drew it back, steadying herself. "You should change before you catch a chill," she said softly. Elias nodded, his eyes lingering on her longer than they should before he stepped inside. Clara stayed, watching the sky break open. Stars winked through the torn clouds, their light falling over the drenched ground. She pressed her hand to her chest, her pulse still restless. The desert rain had come sudden and fierce. It left behind soil softened, ready for seed, and Clara knew whether she willed it or not, the first roots had already begun to grow. That night the rain did not ease as it had in the afternoon. It came harder, pounding the roof in waves, thunder rolling heavy across the sky. Lightning flared, then darkness dropped, shaking the cabin as though the whole world were caught in the grip of a furious hand. Clara stood at the window, fingers holding the thin curtain aside. The yard lay drowned, lit in flashes, each bolt laying bare the swollen ground. Water coursed along the ditch, hissing like a small flood. Inside her chest, her pulse ran with the storm, no calmer than the thunder outside. Behind her came Elias's steps, solid, weighty. He stopped close, so near she felt the heat of his breath against the back of her neck, mingled with the chill damp of the storm. "Never seen rain hit this hard," he said, low and rough, his voice woven into the roar of thunder. Clara turned. In the wavering light of the oil lamp, his face was plain before her. Weathered, stern, those dark eyes lit strange and alive. In that moment, every measure of distance, every wall she had built over the days, seemed stripped away by his nearness. A bolt lit the room. Rain clung to his hair, his shirt still wet and plastered to the shape of his frame, muscle cut clear. Clara wanted to turn aside, to guard herself, but his eyes held her fast, gave no room to flee. "Clara." He spoke her name slow, like a prayer. Her knees weakened not from lightning, but from the weight of his tone. I'm not young anymore, Elias," she whispered. "I won't be made a fool of by fate. He stepped in, lifted her chin with his hand. The touch was firm, deliberate, yet gentler than she could withstand. "You don't see," he murmured, eyes burning. "It's because you've lived, endured, stood strong, that you're more beautiful than I can bear." Lightning split the night, and in its blaze his mouth found hers. The kiss was soft at first, cautious, as if fearing her retreat. But when Clara yielded trembling, with a hunger caged for 3 long years, the kiss flared into fire. They clung to each other like souls starved of warmth. Elias's hand traced her back, rough yet shaking with want. Clara's arms circled his neck, breathing in leather, gunpowder, sweat his scent, raw and alive, a wildness that quickened her heart. The lamp flickered as wind pressed through the cracks. Their shadows tangled on the wall, restless as the storm. Elias lifted her with sudden strength, laying her onto the bed close by, his roughness tempered by a reverence that lived in each motion. Clara felt youth return to her bones. At 56, her skin alive under his touch, she trembled like a girl again. Her blood surged hot, her cheeks burned, her breath came fast as if she were 17 once more. "Elias," she gasped, voice breaking. "Don't speak," he answered, his mouth claiming hers again, fierce and unrelenting. They wound together, nothing between them now but the storm itself. His lips traced every line, shoulder, scar, wrinkle, as though each mark were treasure. He whispered that every sign of time made her more true, more beautiful. When he joined with her, thunder broke overhead, wild and fierce. Clara bit her lip to hold the cry rising, but tears spilled not of pain, but of wonder. She had thought herself beyond desire, beyond being cherished. Yet here she was, wanted, held, alive. In his arms she was seen, known, reborn. And Elias, burying his face against her neck, breathed hoarse. "I've been dying these last 3 years, but tonight I know I live again." They moved with the storm, at times fierce, at times tender as the night rain on the roof. Their fingers laced, their breaths mingled. No longer widow and wanderer, they were simply man and woman, flesh and spirit given wholly. When the storm eased, thunder fading far off, Clara lay against him, her cheek resting on his chest, the steady thrum of his heart loud beneath her palm. She traced the scar across him, no longer with restraint but with certainty, marking it in memory. Elias closed his eyes, letting her hand remain, as though he had found his salvation there. Clara pressed closer, her heartbeat falling into rhythm with his, and she knew what she had feared all these years was not the silence of widowhood, but the moment of opening herself once more. Now that she felt young again, vibrant, filled with trust. Outside, rain still fell, but softly now, a lullaby for the fire inside. The cabin held a warmth greater than flame, as though storm and time both had stopped, leaving only the two of them. Clara closed her eyes and whispered, "I thought my years were only waiting for the end. But you've shown me, I am still alive." Elias kissed her brow, his voice rough but steady. "And you've given me reason to go on." That night, in the heart of the storm, two souls thought drained dry, found the spring within, hot, fierce, flowing, saving them both. Clara knew then. The fire had broken loose, burning away fear, leaving only life, love, and trust. The storm gave way in silence, leaving the prairie steeped in the damp, earthy scent that follows rain. Inside the small wooden room, the oil lamp cast its faint glow across the walls, shaping the shadows of two bodies lying close. Clara rested on her side, her head upon Elias's arm. His breath rose steady, warm, filling a space that had long known nothing but wind and her own heartbeat. Her silver hair spilled across his chest, soft beneath the calloused fingers that combed it gently. "It's been years since I heard rain from inside someone's arms," Clara whispered, voice soft as though the moment itself might break. Elias turned his hand, threading it through her hair, his thumb brushing her temple. "It's been years since I had someone to think was mine to guard," he answered, rough yet certain. Clara lifted her gaze, black eyes deep and unwavering. "You don't have to protect me. I've lived through these 3 years alone with a gun, with the land, with my grief. I know." Elias bent, touched his forehead to hers. "It's because you've stood alone that I believe in your strength. But even the strongest sometimes need a place to lean." Clara closed her eyes, letting his warmth seep into her. His words settled like fine soil over the seed that had already sprouted in her heart, now rooting deep. Her hand moved without thought, tracing slow circles on his chest. She followed the scar that cut across him, rough under her fingertips, each ridge a story unsaid. "Every scar of yours is proof you're still alive," she murmured. Elias placed his hand over hers, holding it still. "And every line on your face, every callus on your hand, proof you've loved, lost, fought, and risen again. I've never seen anything more beautiful." Clara laughed softly. Shy, but true. Men are quick with words like these. "They're not words," Elias replied, his voice low as thunder still rumbling somewhere far off. "They're what I see, plain as day." They lay quiet a long while. Rain dripped from the eaves, falling in slow rhythm. Out in the yard, a horse nickered, settling back into peace after the storm. Clara felt herself the same as if after a lifetime of bracing, she was at last touched with gentleness. "Do you fear it?" she asked, her voice near swallowed by night. "That what you've found could be taken again?" Elias shifted, drawing her closer against him. "Every day. After I lost the ranch, I thought hope was gone. But I learned it's not the fear of losing that haunts a man. It's the fear of not holding on when it comes. Clara, you've reminded me what hope feels like." Her eyes blurred with tears, yet her mouth curved into a smile. She pressed her cheek to his chest, listening to the strong beat there. "I was afraid too. Thought I was too old to look for anything more. But now, I feel 20 again, foolish, but glad of it." Elias's hand rested at her waist, his arm closing firm as though he could shield her from the whole world. He bent and kissed her hair, whispering, "I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know tonight, beside you, is real." Clara let her eyes fall shut, feeling each breath, each pulse, each finger threaded through her hair. The house no longer seemed hollow. The fire in the hearth no longer burned for one. She had a home now, not in walls or roof, but in the man beside her. The night passed in gentle silence. They needed no words, only small gestures. Elias brushing her hair back, Clara's finger tracing the steady beat in his chest. It was a new rhythm, slow but sure, replacing the lonely howl of the wind. When morning broke, the storm was gone. The sky lay scrubbed clean, clear as glass. Clara opened her eyes to see Elias still there, his arm firm around her as if he feared letting go would scatter the dream. She smiled, for the first time in years without the weight of sorrow. "This morning, I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. Elias opened his eyes, his dark gaze lit by dawn. He nodded once. "Then don't ever let fear take it from you again. From us." Beyond the cabin, the sun rose gold over the washed land. Clara knew a new chapter had begun, not one of loss, but of hope. Not hers alone, but theirs, hers, and Elias's, in the home they had just begun to find in each other. Morning after the storm, the sky looked washed clean. The clouds had broken and drifted, leaving nothing but a blue stretch so clear it seemed endless. The ground, still soft from the rain, carried the scent of wet grass rising sweet from the fields. Clara stepped onto the porch, shawl around her shoulders, eyes narrowing against the sharp blaze of daylight. Ahead of her, Elias was already at work. He stood by the corral, testing the ropes and posts, his shirt damp with sweat, though the sun had only just lifted. His frame, cut sharp against the glistening plain, sent an unfamiliar shiver through her chest. "You're up early," Clara called, her voice still husky from a night with little sleep. Elias turned, a faint smile on his lips. "Old habit. Slept better last night than I have in years. Gave me strength to rise." His eyes rested on her, steady, carrying a truth she felt more than heard. The reason for his rest was not the storm, but her. Clara crossed the yard, her boots sinking into the softened ground, leaving small prints. Together they led the horses to graze. One mare jerked back, skittish from the storm, nearly pulling Clara off her feet. Elias's hand caught her arm at once, holding firm. Their eyes met close, so close she caught the heat of his breath in the cool air. His calloused hand wrapped hers, sure and strong. He held longer than needed, long enough that Clara felt the weight of it sink into her bones. She nodded, smiling faintly, before easing her arm free. Yet her heart beat on, wild as if it hadn't let go. They worked side by side through the morning, mending fence rails, clearing branches, checking the calves. Clara found herself surprised at his ease with the tasks. His hands knew how to bind rope, how to swing an axe, how to soothe a restless horse. She could only watch. "You've lived on a ranch before?" she asked as they rested by the fence line. Elias nodded, his eyes dimming. "Years back. Before. It was gone." She didn't press, but his words echoed what he had told her of drought and banks. The faraway look in his eyes told her plainly, those losses were not buried. They walked beside him still, like ghosts that would not let go. By noon, they returned to the kitchen. Clara poured water into a wooden cup and passed it to him. Their fingers brushed, and this time, Elias did not draw back. He held the cup but let her hand rest there a moment longer. Deliberate. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She turned away, fussing with the soup on the stove, yet she felt his gaze linger heavy on her shoulders. At the table, he was quieter than usual. Where in past days he'd offered some dry humor, now he ate slow, eyes distant. Clara noticed him touch the scar at his throat, more than once a reflex, like a man guarding what lay beneath. "Something troubles you?" she asked gently, laying her spoon aside. Elias met her eyes, hesitation flickering. Then he shook his head. "Only that. I've not stayed put in a long time. Sometimes, peace unsettles me more than gunfire ever did." Clara stilled. She understood. His past was not only scorched land and dead cattle. It was a life spent drifting, hunted by shadows he had never told her fully. That afternoon, as they gathered damp firewood in the yard, Clara caught sight of movement on the horizon. A lone rider, then gone behind a ridge. She frowned, but said nothing. Still, unease tightened in her chest. Elias had seen it too. He straightened, eyes narrowing, gaze fixed on the distance. When Clara asked, he only said, "Likely just passing through." But his voice had dropped, rough and guarded, betraying more than his words. That evening the house sat in strained quiet. Clara stitched by lamplight, Elias honed the edge of a hunting knife. The scrape of steel against stone matched the soft tear of thread through cloth. Neither spoke much. Clara felt the weight between them grow, not the distance of strangers, but the pull of a past trying to push its way inside. She lifted her eyes. Elias sat in the half-light, shadow stretched against the wall, his dark gaze fixed on the flame but far beyond it. Clara's hands itched to reach across the space, to ask what hunted him still. But she held back. She knew if he wasn't ready, her questions would only drive him further into silence. Outside, the desert night lay calm, the stars sharp and endless. Inside, Clara felt the shift. She had opened her door to Elias, given him trust, let him root inside her life. But now, as the edges of his past began to surface, she knew the path ahead would not be laid only with blossoms washed fresh by rain. Shadows trailed him, and by opening her heart, she had welcomed them too. She pressed her lips together, fingers clutching the fabric in her lap, and in that moment she resolved she would no longer live only with her own ghost. She would have to be strong enough to face his as well. The sun stood high overhead, pouring down white light so fierce there was no shade to rest in. Clara was hauling buckets of water from the well when the sound reached her hoofbeats pounding fast on the red dust road. Not the loose rhythm of Elias's horse, nor the easy gait of a traveler. This was ordered, heavy, relentless, like a drumbeat of trouble. She set the buckets down, shielding her eyes against the glare. 3 riders came into view, dust billowing behind them, the sun striking the silver badges pinned to their chests. U.S. Marshals. Clara's heart stuttered. She had lived long enough to know. When the law rode out this far, it was rarely for good. Elias stepped from the corral, a rag over his shoulder. He stopped dead at the sight, shoulders stiffening, eyes narrowing. Clara caught the way. His hand strayed to the scar at his throat, a habit he carried when unease gripped him. "Elias Boone," the lead rider called. His revolver gleamed at his side. "I am," Elias answered, voice low, steady. The marshal reined in before the gate, slid off his gloves, and drew a folded paper from his coat. "We have orders to bring you to Tombstone for questioning. You're wanted in connection with the bank robbery 3 years past." Clara reeled. The bucket she'd set down still quivered, water spilling into the dirt. Bank robbery. The words hammered in her head. She turned toward Elias, searching for denial. But he stood still, face taut, eyes dark. "That's not true," Clara burst out before she could weigh her words. "He's been here, he's worked, he's—" The marshal cut her off with a hard glance. "Ma'am, I only carry out the law. His name's on the record." An accomplice pointed him out. Clara's throat tightened. She saw sweat trickle down Elias's temple, saw his fist clench, yet his eyes, when they met hers, held no evasion. They pleaded, raw, saying more than words could. "I was there," Elias said, voice rough, "but not to steal. I rode with them, thinking it was a freight run. When I learned the truth, I turned my gun on my own. Most of them died in the shootout. I lived branded all the same. Folks don't believe a thief could turn on his gang." He lifted his gaze, fixing her with it. "That's the truth. I never took a cent from that bank, but my honor died that day." Clara stepped back. Each word struck like stones dropped into a still pond. Breaking open waters, she had kept calm. She recalled the scars, the silences, the unease that shadowed him whenever his past was near. All of it, now a picture she had not wished to see. "So all this time, you kept it from me?" "Not hidden," Elias said quickly, stepping forward half a pace. "Only, I hadn't found a way to tell it. I feared if you knew, you'd have never opened your door." His eyes dark, fierce, were not begging for mercy, but for recognition, for trust. The marshal cleared his throat. "He comes with us. You'll hear the rest in time." Clara looked at Elias. In the blazing noon his shadow stretched long across the damp earth, at once strong and solitary. She remembered the night of rain, the fire of his kiss, the tremor in his hands when he clung to her, as if to life itself. Could that man also be the one they called outlaw? She stepped forward, facing him straight. "I want only one answer," she said, her voice steady beyond what she believed herself capable of. "Did you kill anyone that day?" Elias raised his head, his words ringing clear. "I fired but to shield the townsfolk, to stop my own. I've seen too much death in my time, Clara. I'll not carry their blood on my hands." And in that instant, Clara saw no lie in him, only a grief too true to be feigned. She drew a long breath, then turned to the marshal. "He'll go," she said, "but I'll be waiting." Elias looked at her, lips trembling, eyes blazing with sudden light. That single promise seemed to give him strength enough to bear the chains. The marshals bound his wrists, not cruelly, but firm, the weight of the law plain in every knot. Before mounting his horse, Elias turned once more. In the glare of the sun, his eyes burned like a hidden flame, carrying fear and hope together. Clara stood on the porch, her hand clamped white-knuckled on the railing. She could not see the road ahead, nor what the law would bring. She knew only this: whatever shadows his past held, she had seen in him something deeper, something no badge could write down on paper. The little wooden house sat silent after the red dust of the marshal's horses settled. Clara remained at the kitchen table, hand locked around an empty wooden cup. Outside, the windmill creaked in the evening breeze. sounding like the weary sigh of the land itself. Inside her, two forces wrestled without mercy. The cold reason of a widow hardened by loss, and the wild beat of a woman's heart learning to quicken again. They had bound Elias and ridden off with him as though he were no more than a common thief. Yet Clara knew the way he looked, the way he worked beside her, the way silence lay between them. None of it matched a man who lived only to destroy and steal. Still, reason hissed back at her. How many liars had she seen? How many eyes learned the art of deception? How many times had trust broken into ash? She pressed her elbows to the table, buried her face in her palms, trying to steady her ragged breath. Never had her heart been so undone. By late afternoon the door pushed open. Elias stood there, his arms still marked by the ropes. They had released him once papers were checked, but the warning clung close. The shadow of that bank raid had not lifted. He paused in the doorway, wary of breaking the fragile stillness. They let me walk for now, but it isn't done. I'll have to prove more. His voice came rough, tired, but unshaken. Clara lifted her eyes. In that instant, the struggle surged again. She longed to run to him, to hold him fast. Just as strong was the urge to order him out, to shut the door before his past shattered her world. Instead, she rose, poured water into a cup, and set it before him. "Drink," she said, her voice trembling faintly. Elias took it, his hand brushing hers. This time she did not draw back. Her hand shook, but she left it where it lay, inside the hard grip of his. The silence stretched, broken only by their breathing. His eyes, dark as storm-washed earth, locked on hers. "Clara, you've every right to doubt me. I rode with men I shouldn't have, but I did not become them. I'll clear my name. I swear it by what little honor I've left." Clara bit her lip, steadying herself. "I've lost once before. Lost the man I loved. Lost my faith in what life could be. I don't know if I can survive another blow." "You won't lose me," Elias said, firm, his voice carrying the weight of a shield. "If it takes blood to prove it, I'll pay it. All I ask is that you trust me enough to wait." Tears rose, but Clara blinked them away. She had lived too long hiding pain to let it spill now. Yet the hand he held seemed to speak for her that she no longer stood alone against memory. They stayed that way a long while. Clara felt the warmth of his palm seep through her, melting the frost that had lain inside her 3 long years. Reason still whispered warnings, but her heart whispered louder. If she let this moment pass, she would regret it all her days. "All right," Clara said at last, her voice barely more than breath. "I'll give you the chance. But Elias, hear me. I'm too old to gamble again. You must keep your word." Elias bowed his head, pressing his lips against the back of her hand, not in plea, but in vow. "I'll keep it." The room seemed warmer. The lamp's glow spread across their faces, gilding them in gold. Clara studied him long, and for the first time since the badges appeared, she felt the faint stir of hope. Outside, dusk deepened, painting the prairie in shades of violet. Crickets rose in chorus, the drip of rainwater still falling from the eaves. Clara let go of his hand, but her eyes did not release him. That night, lying down, her heart still tugged between fear and trust. Yet whenever she recalled the steadiness in Elias's gaze, the heat of his grip, she felt another truth settle in her. Sometimes belief is not about the past a man carries, but the way he stands in the present. And Clara knew the line between trust and doubt had grown thin as a single hair. But she also knew this. If she never stepped across it, she would never learn whether the future held anything left for her. The news came on a quiet morning. The post-rider from town carried an envelope sealed in red, marked by the District Court of Tombstone. Clara took it, her hand trembling when she saw Elias Boone's name written bold across the front. Elias stood beside her, shoulders tight, dark eyes fixed on her every motion. She broke the seal and read slowly. The words were brief but final. The testimony of a witness and the statement of Sheriff Bion had cleared Elias of the charges. He was no longer wanted for the bank robbery. Clara let out a long breath, as though a stone had been lifted from her chest. She looked up. Elias was watching her, his eyes not relieved but troubled, gratitude tangled with disbelief, as if he dared not accept he deserved such freedom. "You're cleared," Clara said, her voice carrying in the small kitchen. Elias sank into a chair, his broad hands clasped tight, his shoulders sagging. He did not smile. "Cleared by law, maybe, but the past still follows." Clara knew what he meant. Old partners, old enemies, none would forget. Out here, grudges could cling longer than drought. That noon, leading the horses to graze, Clara noticed fresh hoofprints in the damp soil prints that didn't belong to their stock. Elias saw them too. Their eyes met, no words spoken, but both knew. Someone had come close, then ridden off. The sun blazed overhead, but Clara felt cold inside. She realized she stood at a crossroads. Send Elias away to keep danger from her land, or keep him near and accept the shadows his past would surely drag behind. That evening she sat on the porch, gazing across fields glistening with new life after the storm. The wind carried the sweet scent of wet earth. Her mind drifted back to Tom, her late husband, who once stood here beside her and said land only lived when someone loved it. She had kept the ranch alive 3 long years, but Elias had given it something more. Laughter. A man's hand at her side. A breath of life. Elias joined her, silent at first. Then he said, "Lo, if I stay, danger stays too. Men from my past won't let go. I can't let you pay the price for me." Clara turned. His face in the dusk was both hard and weary. In his eyes she saw not only self-reproach, but fear. Fear that he would bring ruin to the woman who had opened her door. She drew a long breath and stepped into the yard. The damp ground sank under her boots, the air still heavy with rain. Memory rushed in, his hand catching her when she nearly fell, his eyes blazing in the storm, his heartbeat steady under her cheek. She turned back, her gaze firm. "Elias, I've lost once before. I know what loss island, but I also know this. Losing the only chance to live again is worse." Elias shook his head, voice rough. "You don't understand. They could come any day. I carry danger with me." Clara came close, laying her hand against his chest, over the scar etched deep there. "I understand more than you think. This land was my battlefield against loneliness, against despair. You walked into it with all your past, but you also brought back what I thought gone forever. I won't let fear take that away." His eyes blurred, his hand rising to clasp hers. "Are you certain? Once chosen, there's no turning back." Clara nodded without hesitation. "I've lived half my life in fear. I want the rest in hope. And that hope is you." Silence wrapped them. The crickets began their song, the wind stirring the porch beams. Elias bent and pressed his lips to her hand. This was no promise, but acceptance, a vow that if he stayed, he would fight for her, for this ranch, for the chance they'd been given. By the time night spread, they still sat side by side on the porch. Moonlight poured across fields fresh and green. Clara leaned into his shoulder, and his arm closed around her. In that peace, she knew her choice was right. To keep him, whatever ghosts the past might send. The breeze carried the soft dampness of earth, as if the land itself blessed their bond. The sun sank behind the western ridge, painting the prairie in shades of deep crimson, like ribbons of fire smoldering low. Evening air carried sweetness still warm from the day, yet touched by the cool of night pressing in. Wind moved through the yucca, still damp with rain, carrying the scent of fresh earth, new grass, and the rising chorus of insects calling in the dusk. Clara sat on the porch steps, hands folded on her knees, watching light withdraw from the land she had tended for decades. Since Tom's death, each sunset had felt like a blade carving fresh loneliness into her chest. But tonight, the scene was changed. Beside her sat Elias Boone, his tall frame casting a steady shadow across her shoulders. He spoke nothing at first. His hand traced idle circles on his knee, his dark eyes fixed on the far fields. Then, as though it belonged there, his arm came around her. The hand, rough but warm, rested across her thin shoulders and drew her closer. Clara lifted her gaze and caught the faint smile at his mouth. She smiled back, and for a heartbeat felt herself carried back to 25, when a glance alone could quicken her pulse, when the sky itself seemed brighter because someone sat at her side. And yet, she was also wholly her 56-year-old self, weathered, steady. Knowing love was no longer a storm, but a fire meant to endure, to warm what years remained. Elias's arm tightened. "Never thought I'd have an evening like this," he said, voice rough as gravel yet soft as the breeze. "And I," Clara whispered, "never thought my heart could stir again after so many years." They laughed, quietly, their laughter brushing the air like wind along the porch beams. Sunset gilded their faces, softening lines and scars, leaving only two souls, not young, not flawless, but real enough to have found one another. In the distance the cattle called, closing the day. Clara rested her head against Elias's shoulder, feeling the rise and fall of his chest. His breath joined hers, weaving a rhythm new to her after 3 empty years. "Tomorrow will be hard," Elias said, still watching the horizon. "Men from my past may return. I can't promise safety." Clara nodded against him. "I don't need promises of safety. Half a lifetime has taught me nothing in this world is certain. The only truth I need is that tonight I'm not alone." Elias turned then, his gaze deep and steady. "I thought myself dead the day I lost my ranch. But you make me want to live again, to plant again, to build a life worth standing for." Clara reached up, her hand brushing the weathered line of his cheek, pausing at the crow's feet etched by years of struggle. "Love isn't about forgetting scars. It's about finding someone willing to walk beside you despite them." He bent, pressing his lips to her hand, then held it to his chest. Beneath her palm, Clara felt his heartbeat steady, certain, as though it carried a vow he could not speak. The last light bled away, leaving the sky deep violet pricked with stars. They sat close, listening as night claimed the land. No grand words, no distant promises, only presence, warmth, the sure weight of his arm across her. For Clara, that was enough to call it home. She breathed out slowly, whispering to herself, "True love doesn't come when we are young. It comes when we are old enough to know its worth." Elias smiled, eyes bright in the starlight. "Then I count myself blessed to have found you just when we were both ready." Clara closed her eyes, letting the warmth from his shoulder spread through her. In that moment, she was at once the girl of 25 with a quickened heart, the widow of 56 carrying loss, and the woman reborn who knew she had found the rarest treasure of all, a second love, late but deep enough to fill the rest of her days.